The joke notebook was clutched like a lifeline in the young man's trembling hands as Jim Carrey talked about the darkness that often lives behind the laughter. Ellen was discussing the comedy legend's journey with depression when she noticed the aspiring comedian in the third row writing frantically, while tears mixed with forced smiles on his face. What happened next would prove that sometimes the funniest people are fighting the saddest battles, and that the most important punchline isn't the one that gets the biggest laugh, but the one that reminds someone their life is worth living. It was an introspective Wednesday afternoon at the Ellen DeGeneres show, and the studio buzzed with a different kind of energy than usual. 400 audience members had gathered to see one of comedy's most fearless truth-tellers discuss his craft and his struggles. Ellen, elegant in a deep forest green blazer with subtle bronze accents, was thoroughly enjoying her conversation with Jim Carrey, who sat with characteristic intensity in the guest chair, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that couldn't contain the kinetic energy that had made him a legend. His presence filling the studio with that blend of manic brilliance and hard-won wisdom about the cost of making people laugh. "Jim," Ellen said, leaning forward with genuine fascination, "you've been so honest about your battles with depression, about how comedy can be both a gift and a curse. What do you want people to understand about comedians and mental health?" Jim's expression grew serious, his famous animated features taking on that thoughtful quality that revealed the philosopher beneath the funny man. "Ellen, I think people assume that because we make them laugh, we must be happy all the time. But comedy often comes from pain. We learn to turn our darkness into light for other people, but sometimes we forget to save any light for ourselves." The audience listened with the kind of respectful attention that Jim's vulnerability commanded. This wasn't typical celebrity promotion. This was real conversation about the psychology of humor and the price of entertaining others. "And the pressure," Ellen continued, "to always be on, to always be the funny guy. How do you handle that when you're struggling internally?" "That's the trap," Jim said honestly. "People expect you to be the character they know from movies or stand-up. So you put on the mask, you perform the persona, and meanwhile your real self is screaming for help behind all the laughter. Some of the saddest people I've known were the ones who spent their lives making everyone else happy." That's when Ellen noticed him. In the third row, slightly to the center, sat a young man who appeared to be in his early 20s. He had sandy brown hair and wore a vintage comedy club t-shirt under a worn blazer. In his lap, he clutched a small spiral notebook filled with what looked like joke ideas and sketches. His name was Danny Morrison, though Ellen didn't know it yet. What caught Ellen's attention was the way Danny was staring at Jim with desperate recognition while frantically writing in his notebook, tears streaming down his face even as he forced his mouth into a smile, as if practicing expressions in a mirror. Danny's pen moved obsessively across the pages, and Ellen could see him mouthing words silently, testing jokes and timing even while crying. Ellen's instincts, sharpened through 20 years of reading her audiences, told her this wasn't someone inspired by Jim's honesty about depression. This was someone living the exact hell Jim was describing. "Jim," Ellen said gently, "hold that thought about people screaming for help behind the laughter. I think someone in our audience needs to hear this conversation right now." Jim followed Ellen's gaze toward Danny, his expression immediately shifting from entertainer to deeply concerned human being as he recognized the signs he knew all too well. Ellen stood up from her chair and took several steps toward the audience. "Young man in the third row with the notebook, are you okay?" Danny looked up, startled and terrified by the sudden attention of 400 people and multiple cameras. He quickly tried to close his notebook and wipe his tears while forcing his face into an exaggerated comedian's smile. "I'm great," Danny said with false enthusiasm, his voice cracking slightly. "Just working on some new material. The show is amazing." Ellen walked down the steps that separated the stage from the audience, something she did only when every instinct told her someone was drowning in plain sight. "What's your name?" Ellen asked, now standing directly in front of Danny's row. "Danny Morrison. I'm a comedian. Well, trying to be one." Ellen knelt down in the aisle beside Danny's row, her forest green blazer spreading around her as she created a safe space in what must have felt like terrifying exposure. "Danny, what are you writing in that notebook?" Danny looked down at the spiral-bound book, then back up at Ellen with such raw pain hidden behind his forced smile that it made everyone in the studio understand they were witnessing something heartbreaking. "Jokes," Danny said, his voice growing quieter. "I write jokes when things get dark. If I can make people laugh, maybe they won't notice that I'm—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The studio fell into that particular silence that happens when hundreds of people realize they're watching someone fighting for their life with humor as their only weapon. From the stage, Jim Carrey stood up immediately. Without being asked, without consulting producers, he walked down to join Ellen and Danny. This celebrity interview had just become something infinitely more important. Jim approached Danny with the careful reverence of someone who understood exactly what it meant to smile while your soul was screaming. "Danny," Jim said softly, "what happens when you're not writing jokes? When you're alone and there's nobody to perform for?" Danny's forced smile crumbled completely. "That's when it gets really bad," he admitted. "That's when I think about not being here anymore. Because without the jokes, without making people laugh, I don't know who I am, and I don't think I'm worth anything." Ellen felt her heart breaking as she watched this young comedian echo the struggles Jim had fought through. "Danny, when did you start feeling this way?" "High school," Danny replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Kids used to pick on me, call me weird, so I started making jokes about myself before they could. It worked. They laughed instead of bullying me, but now I can't stop. Even when I'm in so much pain I can barely breathe, I'm still trying to think of the perfect joke." Jim knelt beside Ellen, creating an intimate circle, while Danny continued to clutch his notebook like a security blanket. "Danny, have you ever told anyone how you really feel?" Danny shook his head. "Who would believe me? I'm the funny guy. I'm the one who cheers everyone else up. If I admitted I was depressed, if I admitted I think about killing myself almost every day, people would think I was just looking for attention or material." Jim's expression had shifted into something Ellen had rarely seen from any celebrity, a fierce recognition of pain that transcended performance. "Danny, I want you to listen to me very carefully," Jim said with quiet intensity. "The funniest people I know, the ones who can make a room explode with laughter, almost all of them have thought about ending their lives. Robin Williams, Richard Pryor, so many others. Comedy doesn't protect us from depression. Sometimes it makes it worse because we feel like we have to carry everyone else's happiness on our shoulders." Danny looked up at Jim with something approaching hope for the first time since the conversation began. "But you made it through," Danny said quietly. "I made it through," Jim confirmed. "But not by being funny. I made it through by getting help, by admitting that the mask I wore for audiences wasn't who I really was, by learning that my worth wasn't measured in laughs per minute." Ellen stood up slowly, her heart racing as she realized they might be talking to someone on the edge. "Danny, have you thought about hurting yourself recently?" Danny's notebook fell from his hands as he broke down completely. "Last night," he admitted. "I had a set at the Comedy Store, killed for 20 minutes, got a standing ovation. Then I went home and sat in my bathroom with a bottle of pills, wondering why I felt emptier after making people laugh than I did before." Jim reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his personal phone. "Danny, I'm going to do something right now. I'm calling someone I know who helps comedians and performers deal with depression and suicidal thoughts. But more than that, I want you to have my personal number." He handed Danny a business card with his information written on it. "When you feel like the only way to stop the pain is to stop everything, I want you to call me. Not because I'm Jim Carrey from the movies, but because I'm someone who knows what it's like to smile while you're dying inside." Ellen began removing her forest green blazer. "Danny, this blazer has been with me through some of my most important interviews. But today, it's witnessing something more important than any celebrity story. It's witnessing courage." She placed the blazer around Danny's shoulders. "You've been performing for so long that you forgot how to just be. But the person sitting here, scared and honest and asking for help, that's who you really are, and that person is worth saving." But it was Jim's next words that broke through Danny's despair completely. "Danny, I want you to know something. The darkness you feel, it's not your fault. Depression lies. It tells you that you're only valuable if you're making other people happy, that your pain doesn't matter, that nobody would care if you were gone. But that's not true. Your life has value beyond what you can do for other people." Jim stood up and addressed the cameras directly. "If there are performers watching this, comedians, actors, musicians, people whose job it is to entertain others, and you're struggling with depression, with thoughts of suicide, please know that you're not alone. Please know that getting help isn't giving up on your career. It's fighting to have a career and a life." The moment that brought the entire studio to sustained applause came when Ellen asked Danny what he wanted other struggling comedians to know. "I want them to know that it's okay to not be funny sometimes," Danny said, his voice growing stronger as he clutched Jim's business card. "I want them to know that depression doesn't respect talent or success, or how much joy you bring to other people. And I want them to know that asking for help isn't bombing on stage. It's the best material you'll ever write." Jim's eyes filled with tears. "That's beautiful, Danny, and it's true." Within hours, Danny Morrison was meeting with mental health professionals who specialized in treating performers and artists. Jim Carrey personally funded his treatment and stayed in regular contact throughout his recovery. 3 months later, Danny appeared on The Ellen DeGeneres Show again, but this time he performed a 5-minute set about his journey with depression, mixing humor with honesty in a way that made people laugh and cry simultaneously. Jim Carrey, who had become not just Danny's supporter, but his mentor, appeared in person to celebrate his progress and announce the launch of a mental health foundation specifically designed to help comedians and performers. The segment sparked a national conversation about the hidden epidemic of depression among entertainers and the pressure to maintain a happy facade. Danny became an advocate for performer mental health, speaking at comedy clubs and acting schools about the importance of seeking help and finding identity beyond making others laugh. Ellen learned that day that her job wasn't to interview famous people about their latest projects. Her job was to create moments where masks could come off, where pain could be acknowledged, and where the people who spend their lives healing others through laughter could finally heal themselves. Jim Carrey learned that the most important performances happen not on comedy stages, but in moments when honesty about depression gives someone else permission to choose life over the lies that mental illness tells. And Danny Morrison learned that sometimes the scariest thing you can do, admitting you're not okay while the whole world expects you to be funny, is also the thing that saves your life and gives your comedy real meaning. Because the most important punchlines aren't the ones that get the biggest laughs. They're the ones that remind someone their story doesn't have to end in tragedy, that pain can be transformed into purpose, and that sometimes the best joke is simply deciding to stay alive for the next one.